An A380 pilot loses control of their rudder, and another pilot tries to amputate his own wing. And all I can say is,
wow.
and you'll see why I say that when you watch this full clip.
Wow.
I find that funny because a lot of the times that you see stuff on social media, people are screaming and over the top and, oh my gosh, and then all you have this lady do is say,
wow.
And I love it. So one of the other things that I love is these larger aircraft. When you have these larger flight controls, you're able to see better what the inputs that are getting put into the aircraft from the pilot. So there's something that the pilot does here, which is pretty normal that I've done, but that the pilot also does, which almost caused this to be a terrible situation. Before we talk about them floating down the runway and the other issues with this landing, I want you to notice what's happening here with the elevator, which is this area of the plane. You might notice that it's starting to go up and down and up again. Essentially what's going on is the pilots are floating down the runway and they're trying to get that plane to get onto the ground. And by doing that, they're trying to push the nose over a little bit and pull it back. And they're trying to keep the nose from actually slamming into the ground. So you'll push the nose over and bring it back. And the reason why that happens is because when you're carrying too much speed, you start floating down the runway and you know you need to get your plane on the ground. But you can't just nose the plane over to get it on the ground because the nose will hit the ground first, and that never works out well. Now you will see pilots at all levels from a small Cessna to a large aircraft doing this, but the trick is to get the plane to get on the ground without shoving the nose straight in. These planes are designed to be able to have the main landing gear take a significant amount of weight, but that nose gear is used mostly for steering and to obviously handle the other side of the weight of the aircraft, but it's not designed to take the major brunt of the landing. There have been cases of the nose gear actually landing first and it never results well. Usually the nose gear ends up crumpling, which means the pilots could have just had a simple go around. Now the reason this plane is floating down the runway is because, I'm guessing, they had a wind additive. What happens is, and it's different for every plane and every airline, but you will get an additional amount of speed that you have to carry over the threshold as you get down to the runway. Reason being is that wind is, let's say, gusting, and you want to have the wind drop out on you. I had that happen to me once, not on the 7.4, but on the RJ, more than once. But one of the first times it happened, I didn't have that wind additive in there. I don't think we were using it, or if we did, I didn't know about it. Anyways, we didn't have this wind additive, and we ended up coming in, and we were getting close to the ground, and the gust dropped out just as I was getting ready to come in and land. And when that gust dropped out, basically the lift of the wing just went away. Boom, the plane hit the ground. It was very embarrassing for me. And you know, if you're ever having a bad day and your spouse is upset with you, just realize that in the matter of seconds, I disappointed 70 people all at once. So this floating that you see here is because the pilot failed to properly bleed the speed off as they were coming in to touch down on the ground, which in theory sounds really easy. Get over the threshold, bleed the speed off until you touch down, but you're dealing with gusts, the crosswind, and all the other factors that you normally have with landing. And if you pull it out too soon, you have a dropout situation like I had in the regional jet. And if you leave it in too long, you have this situation where you're floating down the runway. So it's a bit of art and science blended together. So that's why you see this elevator going up and down like this, because they're trying to get onto the ground. Which, if you ask me, depending on the situation, you're better to have that situation than chop the power and try to get it exactly on 1,000 foot markers, depending on the length of your runway. If you have a, let's say, 12,000 foot long runway, I just had this the other day. We were going into Hong Kong, it was gusty, and I was fighting the plane to get down onto the ground. And I left the power in a little bit longer than I probably should have, but I think we landed about 2,000 feet down the runway, maybe 1,500, it was night. But that is a better situation than going in and chopping the power and slamming it into the ground. I just kind of pull the power back and just kind of fly it into the ground as best I can with a flare and everything, but you want to get it as close to the ground before you get that power all the way out, just so if the wind does drop out, the plane's dropping a foot or two, not 10 or 20 feet. Even though the planes can handle that, it's just not ideal. Now let's talk about why this landing went so poorly. And it all has to do with this area right here, which is the rudder. So on this graphic here, the plane is coming in and their wind is coming from the left-hand side. And that means the plane is actually crabbing in this direction. So the only rudder input that should be going in is to deflect it to the right-hand side, which will essentially straighten the plane out. So here's the plane in the crab with no rudder input. Here's the plane with a right rudder input pushed in, straightening it out to go down the runway. But this pilot, for some reason, which I'm going to explain my theory of what happened, but it doesn't make sense in this situation, but this is what it looks like. Instead of putting the right rudder in, they put the left rudder in, which essentially makes the plane go almost sideways. Now that graphic is a bit exaggerated, but I wanted to show you to highlight exactly what looks like's happening right here. You'll see right here that the right rudder is in, which is helping to straighten the plane out. Because the wind is blowing from the left-hand side, so this right rudder will help the plane straighten out as it gets over the runway. But watch what the pilot does here. Look at the rudder right here. It's now deflected to the left, and watch how the plane reacts. Now, in fairness to the crew, whoever was up there flying, they made a great save because that was very close to having a pod strike, meaning the engines hit the ground. That was very close to that. So to have something like that happen and not have a pod strike and to save that landing from going off the runway or anything at all being worse than that is incredible. That was not an easy save, but here's my theory of what happened. When you're flying a crosswind landing like this, what can happen is it can be very stressful for the pilots. And I know because I've done exactly what I think happened here. And that is you get stressed out, you get both feet that are on the rudders, and the stress of it all, you start putting a lot of pressure on both rudders because you're just kind of bracing yourself as you try to fly this plane down. You get really, really tense. And that's why if you ever fly with me and it's a really windy day especially, or gusty or whatever, I try to chew gum because it relaxes me. That works for me. But that will relax me and that will keep me a little bit more loose. So I think what looks like happened is they had both feet on the rudders, probably very firmly, and what should be happening is that right rudder should be modulating, meaning you're putting a little bit more in and you're taking a little bit out just to keep the plane going straight. But what happens is if you have both feet on the rudder there and you push in and you're pushing in and out on that right, and you have a lot of weight on that left, which shouldn't really be any, you have a lot of weight on that left-hand side. If you let out from the right-hand side and you have just a lot of pressure sitting on the left because your foot is pressing hard against the rudder, you let out from the right, boom, the left goes in. So what I typically do is to prevent that situation, because I've made that mistake, not like you saw here where they almost had a pod strike, but I've made a similar mistake in other situations. If I'm coming in a situation like this and I'm having to fight the plane onto the ground and work the right rudder or left rudder, doesn't matter, what I will do is I will put the right rudder in, my foot on that rudder, and now be modulating with that, and I'll put my left foot right above, just kind of like hovering right above that left rudder, just in case that I need it. But I really make a conscious effort to not have it really on the pedal. It's right above the pedal, like inches or an inch or a millimeter above the pedal, and I'm keeping it right there just in case I need it. But that avoids this situation. And then you're gonna be really using the right rudder, taking it in and out a little bit, but you're always gonna be having, when the wind is coming from this direction, some level of rudder off of one side. You really don't need pressure on the other side. So if I keep my foot hovering there, it's there just in case something happens, the wind shifts and goes to the other side, but I'm keeping it there, and then I'm just in and out on that whatever rudder I need. And I do that to avoid this situation right here, because it's very easy when you put the wrong rudder input to have those engines that are on the downwind side hit the ground. And I have seen situations just like this where they step on the wrong rudder and they actually hit one or two engines on that side. So for as bad of a mistake as that is, the pilots that were up there, either somebody jumped in or they corrected their mistake as they realized what they were doing. Whatever it was, They saved the engines, which is incredible. They got back up in the air, and I'm assuming they got back on the ground safely the second time. And sometimes these are the mistakes. But that just goes to show you that a go-around in this situation, just because you jacked everything up and you led up into this situation, do a go-around, and it's just like a do-over. And it's no harm, no foul. You made a mistake, you stepped in the wrong rudder, you had too much tension on that rudder. Whatever it was that happened, not a big deal. You go up and you do it again. And I'm sure you're going to be thinking about that one for a while. Okay, my first instinct when I see this is I'm thinking that ground marshaller didn't see the pull somehow, and they marshaled these guys straight in, and the pilot, who is ultimately responsible for the aircraft regardless of what the marshaller is doing, was just following the instructions of the marshaller, which is an easy trap to fall into. I've done similar things without hitting a pull, but I've done similar things, and so they fell into that trap and then drove their plane into the pull. That was my initial thoughts, but as I watched that again on the full screen, I noticed something that I didn't really expect to see. Right here we see two marshallers. There's probably a third over here, but this footage is kind of grainy. We have this guy on the right wing. He looks like he's squatting, which is fine. His job is basically to make sure this right wing doesn't hit anything. And then he will signal to the guy that is up at the front, who's the one that the pilots are looking at. And that is this guy right here. Again, it's grainy. That guy is the guy that you'll see if you're ever at the airport who has those wands in the daytime, and those wands is what we watch, and they tell us to go left, right, slow down, stop, all these different signals. There's signals for fire and start your engines, there's signals for everything, but we watch those different signals, and that's what lets us know what we need to be doing. If we get a signal to stop, regardless of whether we're at our parking spot or not, that's what we do. So that's at the daytime. This is really easy, and at nighttime, those wands glow, and sometimes people call them lightsabers. I don't know. I would love to play with those. No one has ever let me play with them, but there's probably a reason for like that. I'm sure if I was marshaling people in at night, it would look something like this. So now before the plane actually hits the pole, watch what happens to that main marshaller, the one in the front. That's the one that the pilot should be looking at. Watch what he does. Notice this guy running off before the plane has even hit the pole? Now, if I'm taxiing that plane forward and the person that I'm supposed to be looking at, I can't see them. Let's say they go under my nose or behind something, or I can't see them in any way, then you stop. You can't see the person that's helping you park. You're not just going to keep moving forward. So that's one scenario. He couldn't see them because he went too far under the nose, let's just say. The other scenario is that the guy just started running away. Now, if you're there taxiing the plane and the person that is supposed to be helping you park starts running for any reason, it's time to just stop, right? There's no reason to keep rolling forward. So my guess is this pilot maybe got distracted, one scenario, or they thought they set the brake and they didn't set the brake, which I have had similar situations like that, where you thought you'd set it, but you didn't set the brake, and then the plane starts rolling forward. So as a rule now, when I set the brake, I verify on the screen that the parking brake is set, and then I look out my window as I let my feet off the brakes. I look out the window and verify that we're not moving forward. So it's like a double check, because once you look down for a couple seconds, you can move forward and do something like hit a pole, run over somebody. You've seen in some of my vlogs how close we are to a wall. If you have your engines running and the parking brake you thought was set and it's not, and it just moves forward, you can run into a terminal. That's happened before. You can run into a wall, all those things, and your chief pilot is going to be very upset. And you can't say, oh, the marshaller told us we could keep coming forward. You, at the end of the day, as a pilot, are responsible regardless of what the ground crew are doing. So you have to be responsible despite what they're doing. So in this scenario where there's a pole there, let's just say that marshaller was telling them to keep coming. When I'm coming in anywhere, whether marshaller is there or not, we're on a tug being pushed or not, I'm always looking. So if we're taxiing somewhere in the airport where it looks like it could be remotely tight, I'll have the pilot on the right side or on the left side. Regardless, look out and verify that we're not anywhere near clipping another plane. And if people start running away, and I've never seen that in any manuals, but if people start running away while I'm moving my plane, that's an indication to me, go ahead and stop moving forward. I don't know why they kept rolling. Maybe they forgot to set the brake. Maybe they didn't see the guy, or maybe they thought, we know what we're doing. No matter the situation, I'm sure that mistake will never happen again with those pilots, whether they forgot to set the brake or not. I look forward to hearing from you. Until then, keep the blue side up.